All right, Nick, let's talk about the Las Vegas Raiders. It's draft time. Of course, we are still talking about what potentially the Raiders could do in this year's draft, but let's talk about two other teams first and how they affect the potential of what the Raiders are going to do this year. Let's get into both the articles and then we can explain what all of this means on the other side. The first one is a tweet the way of Ian Rappaport, and it says former Jets starting quarterback and number 2 pick Zach Wilson is on the move. Sources say he's being traded to the Broncos, hoping for a fresh start. The deal includes a late round pick swap, a 6th for a 7th, and the Jets will pay some of Wilson's roughly $5.5 million salary. All right, that means the Broncos theoretically have their quarterback that they could have picked up in this draft and a guy like Zach Wilson. The other thing that is potentially affecting the Raiders and this whole quarterback situation is the Atlanta Falcons. It says this from the Falcoholic. It says, when Kirk Cousins seemingly admitted to the Atlanta Falcons having direct contact with him prior to the official start of free agency, it kicked off a league investigation into the team. That investigation appears to be close to wrapping up, and per ESPN insider Adam Schefter, it does not look like it will deliver good news for the Falcons. It appears that the league found wrongdoing on Atlanta's part. Again, Cousins' out loud admission probably doomed them, and Schefter expects Atlanta's punishment to involve draft compensation and be more severe than what the league is expected to hand out to Philadelphia Eagles for an investigation involving contact with free agent running back Saquon Barkley. Obviously, that will probably affect the Atlanta Falcons next year, not this year. Potentially, there's been some rumors flying around of weird things that could happen for this year, but most likely next year. And I think this limits Atlanta in some capacity as well. I'm curious. I want to hear what you explain what all of this means for the Raiders, Nick. But Raiders fans, in the comment section below, we are talking draft. We've talked draft bust. We've talked all kinds of things draft. Let us know, though. We're getting here. We want to go deep. Who is your biggest Raiders draft steal of all time? Who's a guy that they just like snuck through the cracks? Nobody saw him. They plucked him in the mid to late rounds and was an absolute gem. Let us know in the comment section below. But Nick, tell us how these two situations affect the Raiders and what they're going to do in the first round.
Well, I think what it's done is it's taken the Broncos and the Atlanta Falcons off the board for going after the quarterback position in the first round of the 2024 draft, right? Because one of the problems with the Raiders sitting at 13 is that there were a number of teams in front of them that had a lot more potential opportunities to get a quarterback just by the way they were selection, right? The Falcons at number 8. Of course, you had the Denver Broncos at number 12. So those two guys obviously had an advantage over Las Vegas unless the Raiders jumped them, which seemed kind of a challenging thing to do because a lot of the trade opportunities most likely involved the Minnesota Vikings moving up to 3 or potentially 5 to get a quarterback. And obviously the Vikings with 2 first-round picks have a lot more draft capital than the Raiders. So while the Raiders have been aggressively targeting a quarterback, they simply don't have the positioning nor the assets to potentially go up and get one. But what is interesting, and this happens every draft season, is that teams make moves run at the wire or things happen and suddenly they get taken off the board. So if you look at the Atlanta Falcons, right, we talked about them potentially drafting a quarterback in the first round. But now that they're going to lose some draft capital, most likely next year, but we'll see what happens. They now no longer can go quarterback in the first round. They no longer have that luxury. They have to address positions of needs because they've lost some of their future assets. They're most likely going to have to go edge rusher to help them out. So the Falcons off the board for a quarterback. Now let's go for the Denver Broncos here for a little bit. So the Broncos kind of rumored to potentially go after a quarterback, but now that they've got Zach Wilson in their entire locker room right now in terms of their quarterback room, it appears that they're not interested in any first round quarterback anymore. They could potentially be interested in maybe a second or third round prospect, but you don't bring in a guy like Zach Wilson, pair him with 2 other quarterbacks who have played some and Stidham and Steve DiNucci and sit there and say, okay, we've got a bad roster. We've got a lot of issues. Now let's use even more capital on a first round quarterback, right? That's really bizarre. I don't see the Broncos doing that. So now the Broncos are off the board. And now that those 2 teams are off the board, you can look at the fact that the Patriots have said they're open for business. They're potentially up for a trade. It seems like the Minnesota Vikings will probably jump all over that and move up to number 3 to pick up their quarterback. That would push the New England Patriots out probably to 11, 23 potentially, depending how it all shakes out. And now the Raiders have a potential opportunity there to potentially leapfrog either the Patriots at 11 or just sit tight and see what comes to them if the Patriots pick a quarterback at number 11. So basically, this is a lot of words to say that a few days ago, really a few hours ago, it felt like the Raiders weren't going to have a realistic chance to even trade up to get a quarterback, let alone have one of them fall to them at their current draft spot. Now, with this late breaking news and how everything is shaking out, they definitely now have a strong chance to trade up and get a guy, and potentially one of them will fall to them. The odds of the Raiders getting their franchise quarterback in just a few short days just got a lot better.
Yeah, Nick, and I think this is interesting because before some of these articles came out, we heard Tom Telesco talk about how they asked him, is quarterback still on the table in this draft? And he says, I definitely think so, position wise. He said, I don't think anything is off the table for the Raiders. Obviously, I think there was some news that was about to drop before today's press conference with Telesco. Just, coming through and just, sweetening the pot a little bit for the Raiders. So I think this is really great news for the Raiders. Now, will everything work out in the Raiders' favor? Not necessarily. I think there's some hurdles and there's some finagling that has to go on for everything to work out perfectly for them. But what this does do, I think getting some of these pieces off the board, a team like the Broncos, a team like the Falcons, who have been looking at quarterbacks, thinning the quarterback pot in a draft who has lots of quarterback options in it that teams are looking at. I think this just sweetens the Raiders' chances more and more, whether they sit where they are or try to move up somewhat to get a quarterback. I think we've been talking about quarterbacks all that could go to the Raiders. This looks like, a more prime position for a guy like Michael Penix to possibly fall to the Raiders. I just think there's so many options now at the quarterback position. I'm curious to see what the Raiders do, but I think, unfortunately, the way things are going, we're going to have to wait and see. It's going to be a mad dash on draft night. I feel like this is when a lot of these trades are going to fall because I think a lot of people are just waiting to see what the Commanders do at 2, and the pieces are going to fall from there.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. But if you just look at this situation, right, you can imagine the Bears go Caleb Williams, the Panthers go Jane Daniels. Then you have the Minnesota Vikings trade up to number 3. They get, say, J.J. McCarthy. Then the Patriots at 11 are looking at Drake May. And now the Raiders at 13, they have a chance, right, to leapfrog the Patriots if they like May, or Michael Penix Jr. falls to them perfectly, right? Or there's some weird, bizarre world where the Commanders draft Drake May and the Vikings trade up and get J.J. McCarthy. And then suddenly the Raiders can then leapfrog and trade with Atlanta, who's going to be looking for draft assets because they're just going to have to give up some because of the tampering charge. And then the Las Vegas Raiders take Jaden Daniels, right? The window, which looked basically closed for the Raiders to get Daniels and really any quarterback that they would like in the first round, now has gotten wide open. Like you said, Mize, it's going to be a mad dash for these next couple days. And Raider Nation, hang on, because I think it's going to get even crazier when the picks start rolling in.